So GE, whose share price you can just see over my shoulder here, is down 1.5%. General Electric is one of the original Dow components. It was there when it started, along with a leather company, an aluminium company, a steel company, the railway companies. The original Dow Jones, or the original indices, were very heavily based in manufacturing, transportations, and the like. And GE is the only stock to have been there for the last 100 years. But the way the Dow is calculated means GE could no longer remain in it. But that's not the whole question. The Dow as an index, it's only 30 stocks. There are biggest indices that we tend to follow. The S&P 500, for example, 500 stocks, or the Russell 2000, 2,000 stocks. But the Dow still captures the imagination because it carries the biggest market or cap stocks. If you look over here, you'll see the ticker behind me. This is the latest component of the Dow Jones. There you have JP Morgan Chase off 120, Coca-Cola just up 28 cents, McDonald's down $4.77. And what this particular index is reflecting throughout the course of the market, Martina, what it's reflecting are the companies of today.
And so, how well does it reflect the U.S. economy, Richard? You mentioned 30 companies listed on the Dow. Here in Switzerland, we have 20 on the SMI, but still a lot of SMEs, innovation companies here are not really represented. So what kind of a mismatch does this represent?
I think the mismatch for the Dow is not in the companies that it's got, it's in the breadth of it. It has all the big names. In the 1990s, they added Intel, they added Microsoft. I'm just looking at the Dow now. It's got 3M, it's got Travelers, it's got Apple, it's got Visa, it's got Caterpillar, it's got Boeing. So it has got the big players. But of course, with 30 stocks, you're not going to get the depth of the market that you would get with the S&P 500. And that's why you tend to find, if you look at the amount of fund money that goes to the S&P versus the Dow, it's absolutely by a factor of 10. It is in the hundreds of billions of dollars going to S&P funds versus the tens of billions for the Dow funds. But because, Martina, because the Dow has the sexy names, because it has the household companies, it's got UT, Home Depot, Merck, 3M, Walgreens, which has just come in, there it gets the attention. And that's why, even though, if you look at this big board here, the graph there that you're looking at, the chart is of the S&P 500. The actual index that we look at is still the Dow Jones, which is on the top left. It's down 375 points at the moment. It's a loss of 1.5%.
But is it enough, Richard, to have sexy names, or do you see some reforms underway at the Dow Jones to include other names as well to maintain its competitiveness, vis-à-vis, for example, Hong Kong, Shanghai, the Asian stock exchanges?
Oh, I don't think you can compare. It's not a question of making the index more representative vis-à-vis something else in that sense. It's about making it representative of the US market. So, for example, the decision to get rid of General Electric, the decision to add in Walgreens, which is a retailer. Look, I was talking to David Blitzer, who is the head of the committee. He's the chairman of the committee that decides on the rebalancing. And he said, yes, unlike those indices which are purely algorithmically maintained, if you don't meet the criteria, you're out or you're in. The Dow does have a certain leeway. There is a certain committee that says, well, is this reflective of the US economy? Clearly, 30 stocks are not. But the Dow Jones Industrials, because they rebalance frequently, because they are prepared to kick out an old stock like GE, and most important of all, remember, Martina, most important of all, the Dow is a price-weighted stock, not a market capitalization stock. So, for example, give you one last point. I see today that the Dow is off 388 points. I know that Boeing must be off quite a lot, and I know that Caterpillar must be off quite a lot, and I know that United Technologies must be off quite a lot, because they are major Dow components, and unlike the S&P, which is a market capitalization based, the Dow is a price-weighted index. When you see it off sharply, you know the big boys and girls are down.
So do you see any other companies at risk right now to get kicked out of the Dow Jones, or are the others pretty much safe?
OK, so who's likely to go? Well, look, the way you get kicked out of the Dow is if the differential between your share price at the bottom and those at the top is too great, then you get kicked out. But there'll come a time when they'll want to, for example, look and see about Amazon. Remember, you don't have to be on the New York Stock Exchange. You can be on the NASDAQ. There are many NASDAQ stocks on in the Dow Jones. So at some point, the Amazons, the Netflix, the other FANG stocks, Apple's already there, of course. The question of incorporating those stocks into the Dow will come in. And when that happens, the issue of rotating out of more industrials, United Technologies, healthcare, for example, although healthcare is very sexy and very in, so you wouldn't necessarily get rid of United Healthcare. You're going to be looking at who's no longer typical. Verizon, Visa, Walmart.
Yeah, Richard, now the Dow Jones is about 120 years old, the SMI just about 30. What do international investors that you're talking to think about the SMI? Is it a reason to celebrate 30 years of existence?
Well, 30 years is always worth celebrating. There's no question about it. And the SMI the SMI and the Swiss market has a specific role to play. Obviously, as a reflection of the Swiss economy. And the fact it concentrates in many ways on the small and medium-sized industries which are so indicative of the Swiss economy. But the SMI, along with gold, along with the Swiss franc, those have a bulwark nature, if you like. They stand as a safe haven when other things get choppy and difficult. So let's take, for example, and you look, for example, at European bourses today. The SMI was down quite heavily, but then so was the FTSE. Now, the FTSE was off very sharply because of Brexit. But earlier in the week, the Frankfurt DAX was also off very sharp, or last week was off very sharply because of the migrant crisis and the problems facing Chancellor Merkel. So every index, and let's remember, we don't have indexes. We're going to do this properly, you and I, Martina. If we're going to do it at all, we're going to do it right. We have indices in my languages. So if you look at the indices overall, I think you're going to say that the SMI has a specific role, both as a reflection of the Swiss economy and as a safe haven because of the Swiss franc, which is the underlying currency that buoys up that particular market.
Absolutely,
as a safe haven
Richard.
In a time of crisis.
Let's hope that Switzerland remains a safe haven. That's all we have time for, I'm afraid. But great to see you again, Richard, and please join us again very soon.
Of course, anytime.
Thank you so much. That was CNN's Richard Quest, live from the New York Stock Exchange.